The evening was warm in Kumasi, the air heavy with laughter and the smell of grilled meat. The family had gathered to celebrate, plates clinking and children running between chairs. In the middle of the chatter, Kwame raised his voice, calling attention to himself as he often did. With a smirk, he pointed at his wife, Ajoa, and said loudly, "She is nothing more than my servant. She cooks, she cleans, and she obeys. That is her job." The words cut through the air like a knife. At first, there was silence, then a ripple of laughter from some relatives who found it amusing. Others looked away, embarrassed but unwilling to speak. Ajoa sat still, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her back was straight, but her face gave her away. The sting of humiliation showed in her eyes, and though she did not answer, the pain was clear for anyone who cared to see. She lowered her gaze, trying to hold herself together while her dignity slipped away in front of people she had cooked for, cared for, and welcomed into her home. Inside, her heart tightened. The man she had sacrificed everything for had just stripped her of respect with a single cruel sentence. The room carried on as though nothing had happened, the laughter echoing in her ears. But Ajoa sat in silence, her eyes burning. Not with tears, but with something deeper, a quiet fire that refused to die. Before the days of public insults and mocking laughter, there was a younger Ajoa who had dreams of her own. She was a bright student, full of life, with the chance to continue her education and build a career. But when Kwame came into her life with promises of success and a future together, she made a choice that would change everything. She left her education behind so she could help him build his business. At the time, it didn't feel like a loss. It felt like love, sacrifice, and partnership. Ajoa was the backbone of Kwame's early struggles, though few people knew it. She was the one balancing the books late into the night, scribbling numbers by candlelight when they couldn't afford electricity. When rent was overdue and suppliers were demanding payment, she quietly opened her jewelry box and sold her gold necklace, a gift from her mother, just so the business could keep running. Piece by piece, she gave away her treasures to keep Kwame's dream alive. He would take the credit, smiling as if everything came from his hard work, while Ajoa stayed in the shadows, proud to see him shine. She worked side by side with him, yet never once did he say, "Well done," or "Thank you." Instead, as the business grew and money began to flow, Kwame's pride swelled. He started dressing sharper, talking louder, and walking with the air of a man who believed he had built everything on his own. He never mentioned the nights Ajoa stayed awake until dawn, calculating profits and debts. He never admitted that without her sacrifices, there would be no business to boast about. As the years passed, Ajoa's hands grew tired, and her spirit grew heavy, but she kept going. She cooked for him, cared for their home, and still found time to run errands for the business. She didn't complain, not even when exhaustion left her weak. She told herself it was all worth it, that one day Kwame would see her, not just as a wife who served, but as the partner who had built the foundation of his success. But Kwame only grew more arrogant. He began to see himself as a self-made man, dismissing Ajoa's efforts as nothing more than a wife's duty. Each time he said it, it chipped away at her heart. Still, she stayed silent, carrying her pain quietly. What kept her moving was hope, the hope that all her sacrifices meant something, that the love she poured into him would one day be returned. Ajoa didn't know it then, but the same sacrifices Kwame mocked and ignored would one day become the very power he could never take from her. For now, though, she remained in the shadows, while his pride grew taller than any house they had ever dreamed of building. It started with whispers in the neighborhood, the kind that travel quickly in Kumasi. People said Kwame had been seen with a younger woman, beautiful and bold, walking by his side as if she belonged there. At first, Ajoa tried to push the thought away. She had given too much, endured too much, to let gossip shake her. But soon the whispers became her reality. Kwame stopped hiding. He began to bring Efua, the mistress, into public places, restaurants, family gatherings, even church. Efua was young, flashy, and unafraid. She wore bright dresses that drew every eye and spoke with a confidence that seemed to challenge Ajoa's quiet presence. Kwame would stand proudly beside her, introducing her with a smile that cut deep into Ajoa's heart. He didn't care who saw, didn't care how his wife felt. One evening, when Ajoa tried to question him, he looked her in the eye and said coldly, "Your job is to stay quiet and serve. Nothing more." The words were sharp, final, and cruel. It wasn't just about his betrayal. It was how openly he humiliated her. Efua started joining family conversations, laughing loudly, giving opinions as if she had earned a seat at the table. Slowly, people began to listen to her. Decisions about family land, gatherings, and even business matters started to tilt in Efua's favor. Ajoa, who had once been the silent support holding everything together, was pushed to the side like she was invisible. She poured tea, cleared plates, and sat quietly while her position as wife was treated like nothing more than an old title. There were moments when her chest burned with anger, when she wanted to rise up and remind them all of the years she had sacrificed. But Ajoa knew better than to fight loudly. She had learned that power was not always in raising your voice, but in knowing when to keep it. So she watched. She listened. She studied every move Kwame made, every careless word he threw her way, every decision Efua tried to claim as her own. On the outside, she appeared weak, like a woman defeated. But inside, she was gathering strength. At night, when the house was quiet and Kwame slept, Ajoa would sit alone and breathe through her pain. She remembered all she had given up, all she had endured, and told herself this could not be the end of her story. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was patience. And patience, she knew, could grow into power when the time was right. While Kwame flaunted Efua and basked in his arrogance, Ajoa remained in the shadows. But those shadows were not empty. They were her cover, her shield, a place where she could prepare quietly. Everyone thought she was broken, but Ajoa was only waiting, because even a shadow can grow into a storm. While Kwame was busy showing off his wealth and parading Efua around, Ajoa was moving in silence. What Kwame never noticed was how careful she had been over the years. Every time she sold her jewelry, every time she gave up her savings to pay rent or cover debts, she made sure there was proof. She kept small receipts, notes, and signed slips that told the story of her sacrifices. To everyone else, she was just the quiet wife who served, but behind that silence was a woman who had been building her own shield. She found her ally in Mr. Mensa, a calm, steady lawyer who had seen too many women lose everything after giving their all. He respected Ajoa's strength and never judged her silence. Whenever she visited his small office tucked away on a quiet street in Kumasi, she carried files in a plain bag, looking like just another woman running errands. Nobody knew those papers held her future. Over cups of tea, Mr. Mensa carefully explained her rights. Ajoa, every sadi you put into Kwame's business makes you a legal partner, he told her. The law may not shout loudly, but it will stand with you when the time comes. Together, they worked through documents, signing forms and registering her financial contributions. Bit by bit, Ajoa's invisible sacrifices turned into visible ownership on paper. Kwame, blind with arrogance, believed everything. The houses, the lands, the accounts belonged to him alone. He never bothered to ask how bills were paid in the beginning, never thought twice about who balanced the accounts when creditors came knocking. He walked around as the sole king of an empire, completely unaware that his servant had quietly secured her crown. Ajoa never rushed the process. She knew her husband well, loud, proud, and careless. If he ever suspected she had a plan of her own, he would do everything to destroy it. So she kept her meetings with Mr. Mensa hidden, slipping away under simple excuses. Sometimes she said she was visiting a cousin, other times that she had church duties. No one asked questions, because no one thought Ajoa capable of secrets. That was her greatest strength. Years of paperwork built into a powerful truth. Ajoa was not just a helper in Kwame's empire. She was the rightful co-owner of almost everything he claimed. And unlike Kwame's empty words, her proof was written in black and white, sealed by the law. When she left Mr. Mensa's office for the last time before the storm broke, he told her gently, "Patience, Madam Ajoa. The day will come when silence will speak louder than his pride." She nodded, her eyes steady. She had lived in the shadows long enough. When the time came, those same shadows would reveal her as the woman Kwame never thought she could be, the one who held the true power all along. The dinner was supposed to be a celebration. The long table was filled with bowls of fufu, goat soup, rice, and fried plantain. Laughter echoed through the room as cousins and uncles raised their glasses. Ajoa moved quietly, making sure everyone had what they needed. To the family, she was the perfect host, gentle, calm, always serving with a smile. But under the surface, she carried the weight of wounds that no one cared to see. Kwame sat at the head of the table, chest puffed out, drinking more than usual. Efua was there too, dressed in a bright red dress, sitting close enough to him for everyone to understand her place. Some family members looked uncomfortable, but most avoided eye contact. Nobody dared question Kwame. He was too loud, too sure of himself. At some point, the conversation turned to money and inheritance. Kwame leaned back, smirking, and let his voice rise so all could hear. "This woman," he said, pointing at Ajoa, "is nothing. She is just a servant who eats from my money. Without me, she would be begging in the street." The room fell into a strange silence before a few nervous laughs slipped out. Efua giggled, covering her mouth, enjoying the spectacle. Ajoa felt her chest tighten, but her face stayed calm. She didn't let the tears come, though they stung her eyes. She had heard insults before, but this one cut deeper because of the audience. In front of elders, children, and even strangers, her husband stripped away her dignity like it meant nothing. She lowered her eyes to her plate, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. What Kwame didn't know was that he had just handed her the moment she had been waiting for. While he was still boasting about plans to change his will and secure everything for Efua, Ajoa's mind was already moving. She excused herself quietly, stepping outside into the cool night air. The sky above Kumasi was wide and star-filled, the kind of sky that made her feel both small and strong at the same time. With steady hands, she reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. For years, she had waited, gathering strength in silence, trusting her lawyer, Mr. Mensah, to keep her truth safe. Now, after yet another public humiliation, she knew the silence had served its purpose. It was time to act. She dialed his number. He picked up quickly, as though he had been expecting her call. For a moment, she said nothing, just breathed into the receiver. Then, with a voice that carried no anger but a quiet finality, she spoke. "It's time." There was no need for more words. Mr. Mensah understood. The years of planning, the hidden papers, the long patience, it was all about to unfold. Inside the house, Kwame laughed loudly with Efua, certain of his power. But outside, under the stars, Ajoa had just taken it all back. The air in Kumasi felt heavy the morning of the will reading. Kwame's father, a respected man, had passed away, and the family was expected to gather in the lawyer's office to hear his final wishes. The streets outside were crowded as usual, but inside the office, the mood was tense and expectant. Relatives filled the room, whispering in corners, adjusting their chairs, waiting for the lawyer to arrive. Kwame walked in with the swagger of a man who believed the world already belonged to him. His suit was sharp, his gold watch glinting in the light, and Efua trailed behind him, her heels clicking against the floor. She carried herself with pride, almost as if she was already the new madam of the family estate. She touched Kwame's arm and whispered something in his ear, and they both laughed quietly, their confidence overflowing. Ajoa entered quietly, dressed in simple black. She greeted family members politely and sat at the edge of the room. She didn't make eye contact with Kwame or Efua. To everyone watching, she looked like the widow-in-law who would soon be pushed aside with nothing. That was exactly how Kwame wanted her to appear, small, silent, and powerless. He glanced at her and smirked, leaning back in his chair as though the game was already won. Before long, Mr. Mensah, the lawyer, entered the room carrying a stack of documents. His face was calm, his steps steady, but his presence drew instant silence. Everyone straightened their posture, waiting for the moment that would decide the future of the family's wealth. Kwame folded his arms across his chest, already imagining the applause and congratulations that would come once his name was called as the sole heir. Efua, dressed in a fitted blue dress, adjusted her earrings and sat taller. She had been dreaming of this day, her chance to rise officially, to walk into the family home as more than just the mistress. To her, the will was the crown she and Kwame had been waiting for. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Children fidgeted, elders cleared their throats, and eyes darted between Kwame and the lawyer. Only Ajoa remained still, her hands resting quietly in her lap. Inside, her heart was steady. She had already spoken the words that mattered. It's time. And now all that was left was to let the truth unfold. Kwame leaned forward, ready to claim everything. In his mind, his father's empire was already his, and Ajoa was nothing more than an unwanted shadow who would be cast aside. He even whispered to Efua, "Today we start our new empire," and she grinned, her eyes shining with greedy delight. But while they celebrated in whispers, Mr. Mensah carefully opened the folder, cleared his throat, and prepared to read. The silence that followed was sharp, almost heavy enough to crush the air. Everyone leaned in. Kwame was smiling. Efua was glowing. And Ajoa was waiting, her quiet fire hidden behind her calm eye. The storm she had prepared for years was about to break. The room was so quiet that even the ticking clock on the wall sounded loud. Mr. Mensah adjusted his glasses and began to read from the stack of papers in front of him. His voice was steady, but the words carried weight. "According to the records and the will of the late Mr. Cording," he began, "the properties, businesses, and lands in question are listed under joint ownership. The majority rights belong to Mrs. Ajoa." For a moment, it was as if time stopped. The words hung in the air, heavy and unbelievable. A loud gasp escaped from one of the elders, and then whispers spread across the room like wildfire. Eyes that had been looking at Kwame with expectation now turned sharply toward Ajoa. She sat still, calm, her gaze lowered, as though she had been preparing for this moment all her life. Kwame's face drained of color. His confident smirk disappeared, replaced by confusion and disbelief. "What? That's impossible," he shouted, half rising from his chair. He looked around desperately, waiting for someone to laugh, to say it was a mistake. But no one did. The room was stunned into silence. Efua, who had been sitting proudly just moments ago, felt the blood rush from her face. Her bright smile collapsed. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her earrings suddenly too heavy, her hands too shaky. She stared at Ajoa like she was seeing her for the first time, no longer the quiet wife in the shadows, but someone far stronger and untouchable. Mr. Mensah cleared his throat and continued, unmoved by Kwame's outburst. It must also be noted that the financial records show consistent contributions from Mrs. Ajoa over the years. Her investments, sacrifices, and payments were officially documented. Therefore, her position as co-owner is not in question. It is law. The whispers grew louder. Relatives exchanged shocked looks. Some nodded slowly, remembering the times Ajoa had quietly sold her jewelry, the nights she stayed behind when others were celebrating. They realized what they had missed all along. While Kwame was busy bragging, Ajoa was building. Kwame slumped back into his chair, his jaw tight, his pride crumbling in front of everyone. He had mocked her as a servant, but now the truth stood like a mountain he could not climb. His empire was never his alone. It was hers too, and by law more of it belonged to her. Efua kept her eyes on the floor, unable to meet anyone's gaze. The empire she thought she was about to inherit had slipped from her fingers before it was even hers. The taste of victory she had prepared for turned bitter in her mouth. Ajoa finally lifted her eyes. She did not smile, she did not gloat. She simply looked straight ahead, her silence louder than any words she could have spoken. For years she had carried humiliation quietly, and now she carried triumph the same way, with dignity. The room had changed, power had shifted, and everyone knew it. The air in the lawyer's office grew heavier with every passing second. Mr. Mensah adjusted the final set of documents and looked around the room. The whispers had barely settled when he continued reading in his steady voice. As per the will of the late Mr. Cording, he said, pausing for effect, the entire family estate, including houses, lands, and shares, has been left solely to Mrs. Ajoa. The room erupted. Gasps filled the air, chairs scraped against the floor, and voices overlapped in shock. People turned their heads so quickly it was almost as if they needed to confirm that Ajoa was really sitting there, calm and still, in her simple black dress. For years, she had been overlooked, dismissed, humiliated. Now, she was the center of every eye in the room. Kwame's head snapped up, his face pale and wet with sweat. No, that cannot be, he shouted, his voice cracking. My father would never do that. I am his son, his first son. His fists slammed against the table, but the sound only echoed his desperation. Mr. Mensah did not flinch. He looked Kwame directly in the eye, his voice firm and unshaken. It was your father's decision. He wrote it with his own hand. He wanted the one who sacrificed the most, the one who gave without recognition, to carry his legacy. The servant you mocked is now your master. The words cut deep. Some relatives nodded slowly, their eyes shifting toward Ajoa with new respect. Others sat stunned, unable to believe what they had just heard. Efua's face crumbled. The dream she had been building, the new empire she thought would belong to her and Kwame, vanished like smoke. She reached for Kwame's arm, but he shook her off, his mind spinning, his pride shattered. Ajoa remained calm. She didn't move, didn't gloat, didn't even smile. Her silence was her crown. She didn't need to speak. The truth was already louder than anything she could ever say. Kwame, once the arrogant man who called her nothing but a servant, now sank to his knees in front of everyone. His voice broke as he begged. Ajoa, please forgive me. I was wrong. I didn't see your worth. Don't take this all from me. His tears stained the floor, his pride stripped away in the most public of ways. But Ajoa didn't answer right away. She simply looked down at the man who had mocked her, the man who had paraded another woman in front of her, the man who never once said thank you for the sacrifices that built his so-called empire. For years she had swallowed pain in silence. Now her silence was power. In that moment, everyone in the room understood. The servant had become the queen, and no amount of begging or broken pride could change it. The crown was already hers. Kwame stayed on his knees, his hands clasped together, his voice trembling as he begged. Ajoa, please, I can change. Don't do this to me. I will send Efua away. I will make it right. His pride was gone, but his desperation was loud. The room watched in silence, waiting to see what Ajoa would do. She looked at him steadily, her face calm, her voice steady as stone. Kwame, she said softly, you may keep your mistress. That is your choice. But you will never have my respect again. The words were not shouted, but they cut deeper than any insult he had ever thrown at her. For years he had tried to reduce her to nothing, but in that moment, she reminded him she was everything. Kwame's lips trembled as he tried to speak, but no words came. Efua sat frozen, her eyes wide, realizing the man she clung to no longer had anything to offer. The empire she thought was hers had already slipped into Ajoa's hands, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Ajoa stood, her posture tall, her presence commanding. She did not wait for pity or applause. She simply walked out of the lawyer's office with her dignity intact and her future in her hand. That was the last time she looked at Kwame as her husband. In the weeks that followed, the estate that once carried Kwame's name began to change. Ajoa poured her energy into transforming the properties and businesses. But this time, she did not build for one man's pride. She built for the women who had stories like hers. She launched a foundation and called it From Servant to Queen. It became more than a name. It was a movement. She turned one of the family houses into a training center for young women, teaching them skills in accounting, trade, and leadership. She created scholarships for girls who had been told education was not for them. She started small businesses and gave jobs to widows, single mothers, and women abandoned by men who once promised them the world. The community began to rally around her. Where people once saw her as quiet and invisible, they now saw her as a leader, a woman who had walked through fire and come out shining. Mothers brought their daughters to meet her, saying, "Learn from her. She is proof that sacrifice is not weakness." Even the men who had laughed at Kwame's jokes about her now bowed their heads in respect when they saw her. As for Kwame, he drifted further into the background. His empire was gone, his mistress was restless, and his voice no longer carried weight. People had stopped listening to him. The man who once mocked his wife was now the shadow, while the woman he tried to silence had become a queen. Ajoa had chosen not revenge, but power with purpose. And with every life she lifted, she reminded the world. She had never been a servant, she was the builder all along. The afternoon sun poured through the wide glass windows of Ajoa's new office. From her desk, she could see the estate stretching out, houses, schools, and businesses now carrying her vision. The walls behind her were lined with framed photos of young women smiling in graduation gowns, certificates, and thank you letters from families whose daughters had been given a chance at education. On her desk lay a neat stack of scholarship forms waiting for her signature. Each signature was more than ink. It was freedom for another girl once told her place was only in the kitchen. Ajoa leaned back in her chair, her face calm, her heart full. She remembered the nights she had cried silently, the years she had been mocked, and the moment she almost believed she was nothing. Now, the same silence that once felt like defeat was her strength. She had turned her pain into purpose. Outside the tall gates, a figure stood in the shadows. Kwame. His once proud walk was gone, replaced by slow, uncertain steps. He didn't dare approach the office. He only watched from a distance, the weight of regret heavy on his shoulders. The empire he thought was his had risen higher than ever, but without him. By his side, there was no effua, no crowd, no applause. He was alone. Ajoa noticed him but did not move. She picked up her pen and signed another scholarship form, her focus unshaken. Then, almost as if speaking to herself, she whispered words that carried the truth of her journey. A servant? No. I was the builder all along.